When a woman fears she's lost you forever, she doesn't cry first. She reflects. She replays every decision, every conversation, every moment she dismissed your value. And when the realization hits, her fear is not that you left, it's that you've evolved. This message is not about revenge. It's about recognizing value, regaining identity, and rebuilding wisdom. Because when real love walks away, it doesn't slam the door, it simply stops knocking. People don't value presence until it becomes absence. People don't value presence until it becomes absence. And this truth is as real as the air you breathe, but forget to notice. Every day, we wake up next to consistency, and we assume it will always be there. The morning coffee you didn't have to ask for, the check in text that always came without delay, the voice that reassured you after a long day. It was always there, so you assumed it would always be there. But what we fail to realize is that presence is a privilege, not a guarantee. You see, people often confuse availability with lack of options. When someone shows up for you repeatedly, selflessly, without loud announcements or demands, it's easy to think it's their obligation. But let me remind you, the kindest souls are often the most underestimated. They give without boasting, they serve without condition, and they love without limits. But even they have a breaking point. They won't always announce when they've reached it. They'll just disappear quietly. And when they're gone, you don't just miss them. You begin to realize that their presence was holding together parts of your life you didn't even notice were fragile. That man who listened without judgment, who supported you when you doubted yourself, who remained even when you pushed, he wasn't weak, he was willing. He was strong enough to stay and silent enough to endure what others would have walked away from. Now that he's gone, silence becomes your teacher. You scroll through your phone looking for someone to call and realize the one who always picked up is no longer there. You stand in your kitchen remembering how he used to bring your favorite snack without asking. You hear a song, and for the first time the lyrics actually cut, not because of the melody, but because you understand now that love is loudest when it goes quiet. Think about the air in the room. You never thank it until you're suffocating. You never value warmth until winter strips it away. This is what presence feels like when it becomes absence. It chokes your assumptions, it humbles your ego, and it makes you confront the reality that you mismanaged something sacred. When a man decides to walk away, it's rarely because he stopped caring. More often, it's because he realized he was investing in someone who didn't understand the worth of the gift. And no wise investor keeps pouring into a place that only drains. That's not bitterness. That's stewardship. That's wisdom. That's elevation. Let me bring it even closer to home. Imagine your favorite song, the one that plays in the background of your best moments. Now imagine it suddenly stops. No warning, no fade out, just silence. At first, you think the speaker's broken. You check your phone. Then you realize the song is gone. And in that silence, you finally recognize how much rhythm it brought to your life. That's how people feel when a good person, a faithful soul, exits their life. Not in a storm, in a whisper. But that whisper echoes. Here's the painful truth. When someone values you, their actions scream louder than their words. But when you don't listen, when you overlook, when you dismiss, you teach them that their love is unseen. And once they believe they are invisible, they leave. Not because they hate you, but because they finally love themselves enough to stop begging to be noticed. You had someone who gave you time without being asked. Who checked in on your dreams while you were busy chasing other people? Who stood in your corner while you were watching other fights? And now that they're gone, the room feels colder. The days feel longer. The messages don't hit the same. Because what you lost wasn't just a person. You lost a safe place, a cheerleader, a calm in the chaos. Presence is powerful, but its power is often revealed in its absence. You don't know how much someone lifted your spirit until your spirit feels heavy every day. You don't realize how much their words strengthened you until your thoughts become your enemy. And you don't understand the cost of peace until anxiety moves in to take its place. People don't value presence until it becomes absence, because we are conditioned to chase what's hard to get and ignore what's faithfully consistent. But the irony is, the real blessing is not in the chase. It's in the one who never made you chase them. The one who was just there. The one who stayed. But when they stop staying, everything changes. And not because they changed, but because you didn't. You didn't change how you saw them. You didn't change how you prioritized them. And now they've gone silent, not to punish, but to protect their peace. And peace is priceless. Emotional distance feels like death to the soul. Emotional distance feels like death to the soul. Not because someone left physically, but because they stopped showing up emotionally. It's a slow burn. No loud goodbye. No slammed doors. Just the growing silence in conversations that used to bring comfort. The empty spaces where laughter once lived. And the painful realization that someone who used to feel close now feels like a stranger in the same room. When a woman begins to fear she's lost you forever, it often starts with this kind of emotional distance. She doesn't see it all at once. It's subtle. It's the way you no longer ask how her day was. The way your eyes don't light up when she walks into the room. The way your hands don't reach for hers as quickly. And what's haunting is you're still there. Still present, still available, still visible, but somehow completely out of reach. This is the kind of pain that doesn't leave bruises on the skin. It bruises the soul. Because emotional absence is harder to define, but deeper in impact. You can explain why someone moved out, but how do you explain when someone stays, but stops caring? You see, love is not proven by proximity. Just because someone is sitting beside you doesn't mean they're connected to you. And a woman knows. She feels it in her spirit. She can sense the moment your passion faded, your patience thinned, your attention started drifting elsewhere. You're still saying the same words, but the warmth behind them is gone. You're still present in the home, but absent in the heart. And that kind of absence hurts more than being left. It's like living with a ghost. Someone who once brought light, now dimmed. Someone who once gave purpose to a place, now moves through with no emotional gravity. You used to be her safe space. Now you're the reason she holds back her tears while pretending everything is fine. That distance begins to hollow her out. She starts questioning herself. Did I do something wrong? When did I lose his interest? How do I bring him back emotionally without begging? And the worst part, you haven't said you're leaving. You haven't raised your voice. You haven't even admitted that your heart has checked out. That's what makes it so confusing, so damaging, so difficult to fight for. Let me give you a real life example. Have you ever spoken to someone on the phone and halfway through, you realize they're not really listening? They're there. You can hear their breathing. You know they haven't hung up. But their silence isn't just quiet, it's empty. That's what emotional distance feels like in a relationship. You're still on the line, but the connection's dead. It doesn't happen overnight. It's the cumulative effect of small withdrawals. When affection turns mechanical, when communication turns into chores, when listening becomes waiting for your turn to speak, and the woman, once confident, once radiant, begins to dim herself. Not because she lost her glow, but because the person who used to admire her stopped noticing. You stop asking about her dreams. You stop caring about the little things she shares. She starts sharing less, hoping you'll notice. You don't. And she starts to panic, not loudly, but internally. She begins to fear that she's already lost you, even though you still lay in the same bed. Emotional absence is cruel because it doesn't let you grieve. It keeps you hoping. Hoping that maybe tomorrow he'll return to her emotionally. That maybe it's just a phase. That maybe if she just tries harder, prays longer, smiles wider, you'll come back fully. But emotional distance doesn't respond to desperation. It responds to clarity. When someone decides to emotionally check out, you can't force them to check back in. You can only make them feel the impact of your emotional absence too. People underestimate how powerful emotional energy is. You can sit next to someone and still feel miles apart if there's no connection. And connection isn't created by routine. It's created by intentionality. Ask yourself, when was the last time you made her feel seen without her having to perform? When was the last time your words carried meaning, not obligation? And here's the truth that people don't like to admit. Emotional absence feels like death because it triggers abandonment wounds. It reopens old fears. It convinces a person they're not worthy of effort. And a woman who used to be bold, vibrant, and secure now tiptoes around the relationship, trying not to make it worse when in reality, she's already bleeding internally. So yes, emotional distance is the beginning of emotional death. You don't kill a bond by walking away. You kill it by staying while shutting down your heart. You kill it by turning love into a routine and passion into politeness. You kill it when she's crying next to you and you don't even notice. Or worse, you notice and still do nothing. That's when she fears she's lost you. Not because you left, but because you're still there and it no longer means anything. Growth hurts the ones who refuse to grow with you. Growth is a silent revolution. It doesn't always make noise, but it always makes change. And the most painful part of growth isn't leaving people behind. It's realizing they never intended to grow at all. They were comfortable in the version of you that served their convenience. But when you started changing, when you started setting boundaries, when you started evolving emotionally, mentally, and spiritually, you became a stranger to them. You see, growth has a strange way of revealing truth. It shows you who was there for your potential and who was only there for your past. And when a person refuses to grow, your progress becomes their trigger. They don't hate you. They hate the mirror you hold up to their stagnation. Your discipline reminds them of their excuses. Your courage highlights their fear. Your vision magnifies their complacency. And instead of joining you in transformation, they resent you for evolving. Think about the gym. The moment you start training your body, the friends who used to eat fast food with you every night suddenly call you too serious. They mock your commitment. They say you've changed. And that's exactly the point. You did change. But they didn't. And now your discipline offends their laziness. That's what happens in life. The moment you start growing, you stop fitting into environments that once felt like home. And people don't like that. Because your growth exposes their comfort zone. And comfort hates disruption. So instead of rising with you, they'll try to shrink you back to the version of yourself that made them feel secure. They'll guilt you with lines like, "You've forgotten where you came from," or "You think you're better than us now." But the truth is, you didn't forget, you just finally remembered who you're meant to become. Growth forces choices. It forces people to either elevate with you or exit your journey. And when they choose not to grow, they start to suffer the consequences of their own immobility. They hurt because your transformation creates distance. Not because you push them away, but because they refuse to take steps forward. It's like being on an escalator that only moves when you walk. You start walking. You keep walking. You look back, and they're still standing at the bottom, arms crossed, waiting for life to carry them up without movement. They think they're standing still, but in reality, they're falling behind. Because in life, there's no such thing as standing still. You're either progressing or regressing. Growth doesn't wait for permission. It moves. And if you don't move with it, you'll find yourself watching others rise while you remain bound by your refusal. Growth hurts people who refuse to grow because it reminds them of the responsibility they abandoned. It reminds them that their excuses are no longer valid, that they could have done more, been more, tried more, but they settled. And now, instead of applauding your evolution, they attack it. Not because you wronged them, but because you proved it was possible. You became the example they didn't want to see. You became the evidence that change is real, that success is attainable, that mindset matters. And nothing hurts more than watching someone take the same cards life dealt you and build a different future with them. That's why they try to minimize your progress. That's why they spread rumors. That's why they go quiet on your wins. Because to celebrate you would be to admit they gave up on themselves. And some people would rather live in denial than face the truth of their own decisions. Let's make it real. Imagine two people starting a job at the same company. Same salary, same position, same opportunity. But one of them starts learning new skills at night, reading, networking, growing. A year later, they get promoted. Now suddenly, the other person starts whispering, they must have connections. No, they had commitment. They had drive. They had vision. But when you choose not to grow, everyone who does becomes your enemy. Not because they hurt you, but because they left the level you refuse to climb from. And here's the most painful part. Some of the people you love the most will be the ones who get left behind. Not because you didn't want them to come, but because they refused to pay the price of progress. You sent the invite. You encouraged them. You gave them books. You had deep talks. You prayed for them. But they chose familiarity over freedom. They chose comfort over calling. They chose excuses over elevation. Now they're hurting. But not because you changed. They're hurting because they didn't. And your existence reminds them of that daily. You don't owe anyone your potential. You owe it to yourself to grow regardless of who chooses not to come with you. And yes, growth can be lonely. Growth can feel like betrayal. But what's more painful, outgrowing people or outliving your purpose just to make others comfortable, Growth hurts those who refuse to grow with you because deep down, they know they could have made the same moves. They had the same 24 hours. They had access to change. But they chose the easy path. And now watching you shine feels like punishment. But that shine, it's not arrogance. It's not pride. It's the result of paying the price of transformation while others were making excuses. You earned it. You grew into it. You bled for it. And those who stayed stuck, they're not mad at you. They're mad that you proved it was always possible. Your absence awakens her memory. Your absence awakens her memory in ways your presence never could. It shakes her reality. When you're no longer around, she starts replaying every moment like a movie she didn't know would end. And suddenly, the scenes that once felt small, your laugh, the way you looked at her, the way your hand rested on the small of her back when she spoke, now echo in her mind like thunder. Because presence becomes invisible when it's constant, but absence makes everything unforgettable. You see, people don't always value what's always available. Familiarity can breed blindness. And sometimes, the more present you are, the more invisible you become. Until you leave. Until silence replaces your voice. Until she reaches for her phone and realizes there's no text. Until the comfort of knowing you'll be there vanishes. And all that's left is the memory of what was. That's when clarity rushes in. Memory is powerful. It doesn't just remind her of what you did, it reminds her of what she didn't do. The appreciation she withheld. The words she meant to say but never did. The way she let pride speak louder than her love. Because when you were there, she assumed she had time. She assumed you'd always wait. But absence reveals what presence conceals. The truth of how much someone meant to you. And now, she remembers everything with new eyes. Your flaws don't disappear, but they don't overshadow your worth anymore. She starts to realize that what she called arguments were really just cries for connection. What she labeled clingy was actually consistency. What she thought was too available was actually the kind of loyalty most people pray for. But absence forces a new lens, and that lens is truth. Let me take you into real life. Ever lost something small? Your house keys, your favorite necklace, maybe even your favorite hoodie. The moment it's gone, you feel a discomfort in your routine. You search everywhere. You start thinking of all the times you didn't treat it right, didn't store it properly. You swear that if you find it again, you'll never misplace it. That's human nature. We wake up to value after we experience loss. It's the tragedy of hindsight. The same happens in love. When you're gone, she doesn't just remember the major moments. She starts to relive the quiet ones. The late night talks. The way you smelled when you hugged her. The way your presence made her feel safe. Like the world could collapse, but as long as you were there, she could breathe. And now that safety is gone. Now that energy is missing. Now the silence screams. That's the irony of life. People hear clearer in silence. They see clearer in darkness. They love deeper in absence. Because when you were around, they were distracted by life, by ego, by pride. But now there's space. Space to reflect. Space to feel. Space to finally be honest with themselves. And sometimes that honesty hurts more than the heartbreak itself. Your absence becomes a mirror. She looks into it and sees her own behavior, her coldness, her neglect, her silence. And it hits her. You weren't perfect, but you were present. You weren't flawless, but you were faithful. You didn't always say the right things, but you stayed. And now you're gone, and that absence is louder than any argument ever was. And let's be clear, it's not just about missing you. It's about missing the version of herself she had when she was with you. Because there's a version of her that laughed more, that dreamed more, that loved better. And your absence didn't just remove you. It removed that part of her too. Now she's left with questions, regret, reflection. And that's a storm no one wants to go through, because memory doesn't come with mercy, it comes with truth. Every room she walks into reminds her of you. The song you used to sing in the car comes on the radio, and suddenly her chest tightens. She walks past your favorite coffee shop and her hands go cold. She hears a joke you would have laughed at and turns to share it, but you're not there. That's when it hits hardest. In the everyday moments that used to be filled with your presence. That's when memory becomes a teacher. That's when your absence becomes a revelation. You became unforgettable by doing what most people refuse to do. Showing up, being real, loving fully. And now that you're gone, she's awakened not by fantasy, but by the weight of what she lost. Not because you were perfect, but because you were rare, and rarity only becomes clear when it's no longer within reach. Your absence speaks more than your words ever did. It speaks of the value you carried, the impact you made, the peace you gave. It reminds her that real love isn't found every day. It's built, nurtured, and treasured. But once it's taken for granted and walks away, it leaves behind an echo that never truly fades. Don't return out of sympathy. Elevation demands separation. Don't return out of sympathy. Elevation demands separation. It's one of the hardest truths to accept, but one of the most necessary if you're going to fulfill the greatness within you. Because life will always give you two doors, one that keeps you where you're comfortable, and one that pushes you into your calling. And more often than not, the door to your destiny requires you to walk away from what once felt like home. Sympathy is dangerous when it becomes a leash to your past. Just because someone is crying now doesn't mean they valued you when they had you. Just because someone realizes your worth after your absence doesn't mean they're ready to grow with you now. Guilt should never be the reason you shrink your light. Some people aren't sorry they hurt you. They're sorry they lost their access to the version of you that tolerated it. There's a difference between love and emotional manipulation. And when you're elevating mentally, spiritually, emotionally, people from your past will try to tug on your heartstrings to pull you back. They won't always say it directly. Sometimes it's a just checking on you text. Sometimes it's a comment on your post. Sometimes it's a friend delivering the message. She still talks about you. But you must ask yourself, is it genuine repentance or emotional guilt tripping? Let's make it real. Imagine you're climbing a mountain. It's steep, it's cold, it's exhausting. But you're climbing because you know the view at the top will change your life. Halfway up, someone at the bottom starts calling your name. They're crying. They're in pain. You love them. You feel for them. But if you go back down to carry them up and they still refuse to move their own feet, guess what happens? You both stay stuck. Sympathy without discernment is how destiny gets delayed. You're not responsible for healing someone who broke you and never stayed to pick up the pieces. You're not obligated to return to a space that God used pain to rescue you from. Growth will make you compassionate, but don't let it make you complacent. Elevation demands you to recognize when something is over, not because you didn't care, but because continuing would cost your purpose. Too many people get stuck in cycles because they can't distinguish between attachment and alignment. Just because you were connected doesn't mean you were called to walk forever. Some people were chapters, not the whole book. But here's the trap. When someone from your past sees your elevation, your glow up, your peace, your clarity, they may try to re-enter your life, not because they changed, but because they missed the version of you that made excuses for them. It happens every day. A woman realizes what she lost when she sees the man she once overlooked become a king. When he starts walking in vision, leading with integrity, choosing peace over chaos, and protecting his energy, suddenly she wants to come back. But the question isn't, does she miss me? The real question is, can she meet me at this level now? Because you can't invite someone back into your space when they're still operating from a place that you outgrew. That's like going back to high school after graduating college. It doesn't make sense. You can love someone and still not return. You can forgive someone and still not invite them into your future. That's not bitterness. That's boundaries. And boundaries are a form of wisdom, not coldness. Let's take a real life example. Have you ever cleaned your house top to bottom? Vacuumed, wiped every surface, opened the windows for fresh air. That fresh, clean energy feels amazing. Now imagine someone walks in with muddy shoes and throws trash on the floor. Would you let them stay? No. Why? Because you put in effort. You valued your space. You protected your environment. The same logic applies to your heart, your mind, your life. After you've healed, grown, and rebuilt. Don't let people return with the same mess you had to fight to recover from. Don't let tears trick you into trauma again. Just because someone feels bad doesn't mean they're ready. Emotions are not enough. Growth is seen in changed behavior, not just in soft apologies. You've got to ask, are they walking the talk now? Are they willing to rise to where I'm going, not just cry over where I've been? And don't confuse loneliness with destiny. Sometimes when you're on the elevation journey, it gets quiet. You'll look around and see fewer people clapping, fewer people calling, fewer people understanding. But that's not a sign to go back. That's a sign you're breaking free. Growth isn't always glamorous. Sometimes it's sitting in silence, wrestling with your standards, missing people you still love, but choosing you anyway. Because what's the point of climbing if you keep going back for people who don't even want to walk? What's the point of healing if you keep reopening doors for people who only knew the broken version of you? What's the point of building if you let demolition walk back in? Don't return out of sympathy. Elevation is expensive. It costs company. It costs compromise. But it gives you peace, clarity, strength, vision. And above all, it gives you you, the real you. The version of you that isn't held back by guilt or bound by the weight of someone else's regret. Real men know when to close the chapter with dignity. Real men know when to close the chapter with dignity. Not with rage, not with revenge, not with begging or blaming, but with dignity. Because there comes a moment in every man's life when he must choose between holding on to what's familiar or stepping into what's necessary. And if you're going to be the kind of man who leads himself before he ever leads anyone else, you must know when a chapter no longer serves your future. Dignity isn't about being cold. It's not about pretending you don't care. It's about knowing your value and refusing to water it down for someone who can't see it. There's a silent power in walking away without slamming the door. Because real men don't need chaos to prove they've moved on. They carry themselves in such peace that even the silence becomes a message. You don't have to scream your worth when your actions already speak it. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is to let go of something you loved, especially when you thought it would last. Maybe you planned your future around her. Maybe you showed up consistently, gave your loyalty, even stretched yourself just to make her feel secure, but she didn't value that. She played games. She used your heart as a backup plan while chasing her confusion. And there you were, staying, hoping, believing. But there comes a point when a man must stop asking why she changed and start asking why he kept accepting it. You see, there's a moment of transformation in a man's life when he realizes that chasing someone who doesn't see him is a form of self-betrayal. And that moment, that awakening, is when he chooses his peace over her potential. Yes, you saw her potential. You saw who she could be. But you cannot keep bleeding for someone who refuses to heal. You cannot keep showing up for someone who only shows up when they fear losing control. Real dignity means knowing when the effort is no longer love, but survival. There's nothing powerful about staying in a place where you're tolerated but not treasured. Nothing courageous about waiting on someone who only loves you when it's convenient. At some point, you must put down the phone, stop rereading the messages, and remind yourself that being loved halfway is not a blessing. It's bondage. Every man has that moment where the storm clears and he sees the truth, not from her words, but from her behavior. Because words lie, but patterns never do. And once you notice the inconsistency, the emotional manipulation, the gaslighting disguised as just being emotional, that's when the shift begins. And if you've got any sense of purpose inside you, that shift will tell you close the chapter. Do it for your peace. Do it for your future. Do it for the version of you that had to pretend he was okay every time she gave you silence instead of answers. Close it. Not with a post, not with a rant, not with some dramatic goodbye, but with that quiet, powerful decision that says, I am done choosing people who would never choose me the same way. Let me make it real for you. Imagine you're reading a powerful book, one of those books that pulls you in. You invest in the characters, you feel the plot twists, but then suddenly the story loses direction. The same conflict repeats over and over. No resolution, no growth. Just loops. You don't burn the book, you don't throw it away, you don't curse the author. You simply close the chapter because you know there are more pages to be written and your story cannot afford to get stuck in one plot line that refuses to evolve. That's how a real man moves. Not with bitterness, but with clarity. Not with desperation, but with direction. And yes, it may hurt, but pain with purpose is better than comfort in confusion. You weren't born to be stuck in someone else's indecision. You were born to rise, to lead, to evolve. And evolution requires exit. You might walk away with unanswered questions. You might never hear the apology. She may never admit what she did. That's okay. Closure is not about getting her to explain. It's about giving yourself permission to leave without it. Dignity is when you stop trying to be understood by someone who refused to understand you when it mattered. Dignity is when you choose growth over being right. And growth always asks for one thing first: release. Release the memories, not to forget them, but to stop being defined by them. Release the hope, not because hope is bad, but because misplaced hope is poison. Release the version of her that only existed in your mind. Because the truth is, you fell in love with her potential, but lived with her patterns. And at some point, you've got to stop clinging to who she could be and face who she really is. She might reach out when she sees your silence. She might miss your energy when you stop giving it freely. But don't go back. Don't open old doors that led you into storms. Real men don't circle the same block looking for different scenery. They build new paths. They learn the lesson. They thank the chapter. And they walk away like kings, not because they didn't care, but because they finally did for themselves. So here you are, standing in the silence after the storm, the dust settling around the pieces of what was. You didn't break it, but you're the one who had to sweep it up. And that right there, that strength to keep standing, to keep walking, to keep breathing when your chest was on fire. That is the mark of a man who's ready for his next season. Let them say what they want. Let them assume what they will. Because when a man walks away with peace in his spirit and power in his silence, the world starts to notice. You've got nothing to prove to anyone who couldn't see your worth when it was right in front of them. And the truth is, people only realize your value when access is denied. Sometimes it takes your absence for them to respect your presence. But by the time they open their eyes, you'll already be gone, not out of pride, but out of purpose. Because here's the hard truth. You don't owe anyone your downfall to prove your loyalty. You don't owe anyone your delay to show your love. Real love honors you. It doesn't hinder you. Real love builds you, not breaks you. And if someone couldn't see your greatness when you were low, they don't deserve to stand beside you when you rise. You were never made to chase. You were made to lead, to create, to establish. And every time you choose your peace over chaos, your growth over guilt, your mission over emotion, you take back your power. The same power that made you survive what you never thought you'd recover from. The same power that made you smile again after crying behind closed doors. That's not weakness. That's warrior discipline. Let me tell you this, you're not hard to love. You're not too much. You're not unavailable. You're just operating at a frequency that demands maturity. And maturity doesn't beg for attention. It commands respect. That's why they couldn't handle you. Because you weren't created to be part of a playground. You were made to build empires, to set standards, to walk like royalty in a world that thrives off confusion. And royalty never chases validation. It simply is. So stop explaining yourself. Stop giving discounts on your energy to people who can't afford the full price of your value. You were never rejected. You were redirected. You were never abandoned. You were aligned. Life didn't break you. It built you. And when you finally rise from the ashes of heartbreak, betrayal, and disappointment, don't rise quietly. Rise with vision. Rise with clarity. Rise with the kind of focus that makes people wonder how you made it through without losing your soul. And when they come back, not if, but when, let them see what they missed, not from a place of spite, but from a place of sovereignty. Smile not to show you're better, but to show you've healed. Walk past not to shame them, but to prove to yourself that closure was never in their hands. It was always in yours. You are not who left. You are not who broke. You are who stood back up. You are the man who kept going when quitting looked like relief. You are the man who learned that strength is silent, that power is restraint, and that dignity is louder than drama. Because one day, the woman who thought she lost you forever will look back and see not just the man she once knew, but the king she never deserved. And by then, you won't be angry. You won't be bitter. You won't even need revenge. Your growth will be the loudest response. Your life will speak louder than your pain ever could. And your purpose will outshine every lie, every loss, and every lonely night you endured to get here. This is not your ending. This is your elevation. And every great man has a breaking point, but only kings know how to turn that breaking into birthing. So fix your crown, straighten your back, wipe your eyes, and walk like you've already arrived. Because everything you lost was just making room for everything you're about to gain.